The story of Bridget Cleary is one of the most famous crimes in Irish folklore, often referred to as the last witch burning in Ireland. In March of 1895, Bridget Cleary's disappearance was reported under circumstances that puzzled the Irish police, and her discovery days later only deepened their confusion. Bridget Boland was an Irish woman born in 1869 in the Farley area of Ireland. Known for her intelligence and wit from a young age, she was raised by her parents to be self-reliant. In her youth, she was sent to learn from the nuns in the area, and later she worked as an assistant to a seamstress in one of the nearby villages, where she learned sewing and business management. In 1878, Bridget met her husband, Michael Cleary. She married him at the age of 18 while Michael was 27. At the time of their marriage, Bridget's mother was ill, so Bridget decided to continue living with her parents instead of moving in with her husband to take care of her sick mother. Bridget's independence from her husband increased her self-reliance. She began working in sewing clothes and had chickens that she raised and sold eggs from. This was not customary in Irish society at the time. It was known that a woman was supposed to stay home and raise her children, but Bridget was different from what society expected of her. She had no children, and she relied on herself. And she worked.
People's talk about her wasn't positive. She was accused of betraying her husband Michael after years of marriage. After her mother's death, Michael decided to move in with Bridget into her family's house. The house was small and designed for servants and workers, but it was decent. Bridget's father was a farmer in his youth and was accustomed to this type of housing. But the house had one problem. It was known among the locals that it was built near a fairy fort. At that time, there was a common belief in Ireland in the existence of fairies. They were the explanation for any strange phenomenon without a clear explanation. For example, they were the cause of any strange noises heard at night, food spoilage, bad luck, and diseases. There was even a belief that fairies could enter houses at night and abduct children, exchanging them with fairy changelings. According to these stories, fairies gathered in areas known as fairy forts. These areas had a distinctive circular design. Some were historical sites and medieval fortresses. It was known among the Irish that they were inhabited by fairies. Bridget Cleary, after taking her husband's family name, lived near one of these places. She was not afraid of these stories. On the contrary, she was fascinated by fairy tales, so she wasn't bothered by living near their gathering place like other people. She loved to visit the fairy fort and spend time there. On the 4th day of March in 1895, it was a cold day. Snow was piled up covering the entire area. But Bridget Cleary ventured out of the house that day to deliver an order of eggs to one of her customers. Some people say that when she left, she went to the fairy fort. No one is sure. But those who are certain say that when Bridget returned home that day, she wasn't herself. She was sick and had a high fever. She spent the rest of the day in bed, complaining of severe headaches. Bridget's condition worsened day by day. Her father and husband brought her several doctors and monks, but none of them could cure her. Suspicions and thoughts began to swirl in Michael's head. No one knows exactly where the idea came from. Was it because of his shame from people's talk about her, or because she strongly believed in fairy tales? But Michael began to believe that the sick woman in his house was not his wife. He believed she was a fairy who had replaced Bridget and taken her form. One day Michael asked her and demanded that she confess whether she was truly his wife or a fairy impersonating Bridget. She was scared but, of course, didn't confess and insisted that she was his wife. Michael was not convinced and returned to her the next day holding a hot iron rod in his hand, demanding again that she confess. Bridget was frightened but still didn't confess, insisting she was his wife. Michael's suspicions grew every day as the illness worsened. He believed he had to act, or else the fairy would permanently replace his wife. On the 10th day of the illness, Michael decided to act and force the fairy to confess and return his wife before it was too late. He entered the room with 3 of his cousins and tied her to the bed. They began to beat and torture her, demanding that she confess. They put her head near the fireplace, threatening and repeating the question whether she was a fairy or a true woman. She finally surrendered and decided to confess to them that she was a fairy so that they would stop torturing her. She told them she was a fairy and promised to return the real Bridget to them. The next day, Bridget was afraid of her husband, but she tried to convince him that she was indeed his wife who had returned to him. She got out of bed for the first time since she fell ill and headed to the dining room to have breakfast with her family. While they were eating breakfast, she asked them for a glass of milk. Michael went crazy when he heard this request. It was known from the fairy tales that fairies loved fresh milk. If this is true, then this woman is not his wife. She's still a fairy disguised as her. Michael lost his temper. He threw her to the ground, beat her, tore her clothes, poured lamp oil on her, and set her on fire while she was still alive. Bridget Cleary's burned body was found on the 22nd of March 1895 in a field near the village of Ballavadlia. After finding her body, the Irish police arrested Michael Cleary and 8 members of his family on charges of murder. When asked about his crime, Michael insisted that he didn't kill his wife. He was sure that what he killed was a fairy,